As a newlywed, do
Mhm.
you feel like you were prepared for marriage?
Yes and no. Yes and no. When I say yes, in the sense of I knew I wanted to get married. So I think part of being prepared is you have to want it and be preparing for it. It's something that I definitely, started to change my habits and how I conduct myself and being prepared for marriage. Where I say no is my wife who I have now, that was the woman that God had for me to marry. However, she got pregnant before we got married. So the timing of actually stepping into it and, getting married, moving in together, taking those different steps that come were accelerated. So, yes, because that's what I wanted. No, because it happened sooner and I didn't have all the time to really dive into it and do the premarital counseling and all those things that are important.
What's up, y'all? This is your boy Jay, and I'm here on the Preparing Men for Marriage podcast. And I've got a special guest here with us today, my man James. We have known each other, I would say, for a short, long time. We've just built a great relationship. I want to let him tell his story because I think it's a great one. We're just going to jump right in. So, James, tell us who you are, all that good stuff. Introduce yourself to us.
Sure, for sure. Appreciate you having me on here, man. And thinking that what I would have to share would be valuable enough to share with the people. And when Jaquan says a short, long time, I always say it's about quality, not quantity. You might know someone for a long time, but not know them well. You can know someone for a short time, feel like you knew them for a long time. So that's what that is. But yeah, so James Lamour, I'm 30 years old. I was born and raised in Boston, Massachusetts, currently residing in Chicago, Illinois. First generation, come from a Haitian household, thick accents, you know, certain things growing up I didn't know how to say properly. Even though English was my first language, I thought words sounded different. But anyways, yeah, so moved around a little bit. I lived in LA for a year, went back to Boston, then came out here to Chicago. But yeah, man, moved to Chicago. Now I'm married, have a kid, another child due any day now, any hour now. So yeah, great to be on here, bro.
That's what's up, man. That's what's up. So we just jump in, man. How long have you been married?
2 years, a little over 2 years. I've
Oh.
learned you got to get that right. I'm still early in, but I got to get that right.
For sure, for sure. So I know we've had conversations offline with this question, but I'm gonna ask, as a newlywed, do
Mhm.
you feel like you were prepared for marriage?
Yes and no. Yes and no. When I say yes, in the sense of I knew I wanted to get married. So I think part of being prepared is you have to want it and be preparing for it. And we had done different things. I'm sure you'll through this podcast people will know, but we got a men's prayer group, and that's something that we were talking about for a little bit is preparing for marriage. And I think for the most part, all the men in our group want to be married or are married. So that's something we've discussed. So it's something that I definitely started to change my habits and how I conduct myself and being prepared for marriage. Where I say no is I moved into marriage. As you know, my wife who I have now, that was the woman that God had for me to marry. However, she got pregnant before we got married. So the timing of actually stepping into it and, getting married, moving in together, taking those different steps that come were accelerated, right? So, yes, because that's what I wanted. No, because it happened sooner and I didn't have all the time to really dive into it and do the premarital counseling and all those things that are important.
I like that because I'll say in the church,
Mhm.
we try to skate around like our story to make it sound better. And you
Mhm.
just dove right in and said, listen, we weren't married. She got pregnant. Now, you brought up something because also in the church, people will say, well, you just married her because you got her pregnant. But you said you knew that was your wife. I'm going to ask you, how did you know that that was your wife, that this is the person you wanted to be with, but more importantly, that this is the person that God had ordained for you to be with?
So there's going to be two main reasons. I could go into a lot of reasons. Two main reasons. One of the main reasons is so a long time ago there was a relationship that I was in, and I thought, oh, this was going to be my wife, right?
Mhm.
However, through that, you know, at first, your eyes, you got them heart like in the cartoons, them big hard eyes, but then you realize, it's not bearing good fruit, right? Then you start to realize, like, nah, this isn't it. However, through that, after that, what I said is, I wrote down a prayer to God. I said, yo, the wife I want, and nothing like we're keeping it PG, TV 40. What do we?
I mean, we just speaking, bro.
We
We
keep it
speaking
100.
real. We speaking real.
I wasn't putting nothing on there like, she gotta have this in the back. She gotta like, that wasn't on the list, right? I was like, no, truly, God, these are my weak areas. Here are my vulnerable areas. Here's my insecure areas, and I just want somebody that I can feel confident and comfortable with. Basically, right, was the premise of the prayers I wrote down, and I was coming to God and saying, hey, this is the type of woman I want. And then met her and checklist, all of this. Here's another reason is I also know, and there was a time we spoke where I felt like the enemy was trying to throw me off that I, just keeping it 100, had spent a weekend doing things I shouldn't be doing. And just not nothing bad. Like when I say like just drinking, getting drunk, summertime, being around, sundresses, all
You
that.
was outside.
I
You
was
was
outside. I
outside.
was outside. And in my head, I'm like, you know what, bro? And at that time I was in the gym. I was feeling, I was like, bro, you young, bro, all this. That's not God talking, right? That's not God talking. And when you're trying to get shaked out your position, it's not God talking, man, the enemy's trying to steer you off a path, right? Like God could have something set up for you, you're fruitful in it. The enemy go be like, no, we got to mess that joint up right there. And it took conversations, and that's why God said seek godly counsel. And then I pulled back down. Some days went by where that liquor wore off, hitting the outside this wore off. And I was like, bro, you bugging, right? Because I was making up reasons at that time. So that was one. And then actually, no, that was one and two. Those are the main things right there, and it aligned with the goal I know God had for my life, where God was leading me, the timing, the maturity level I was at, and then how my experience with this woman. I think I told you the first time we were going to sleep together, I literally heard God say, "Stop!" Threw the condom underneath the bed,
Yeah.
the couch. I said no, and so yeah, things were just different. Sometimes you just know it's just different.
Yeah. I really love the vulnerability, bro, because it's just we do the vulnerability thing all the time, but I think
Yeah,
why I think this episode could really be a blessing is because if we don't be real and be vulnerable and be true, you don't help anybody with trying to make things sound good, right?
right,
Because someone else could be going through the same thing where they don't throw the condom underneath the couch, underneath the bed, where they don't stop. And now your life is ruined because you made a decision in a split second to do what you wanted to do.
right,
And now you weren't able to get what you need to hear what you needed to hear to make a wise decision about your future.
right. And,
So,
and one more thing to that too is, and then also who you say you are doesn't align with what you're doing. So now that woman and that respect that she has for you as a godly man is like, oh, okay, I thought this is what you were, but within the first few weeks, you trying to, you know what I'm saying? So who you say you are and what you're doing don't align.
I think we underestimate statements like word is bond. In the hood, that's
Mhm.
what you say.
Yeah, yeah,
Well,
yeah.
that's what they used to say. You know what I'm saying? My day and before, word is bond. So that's where word comes from. Word?
Right, right, right.
So, and we've talked about this, in the prayer group a lot, that when you tell a woman, this is who I am, this is what I'm about, and then your actions don't show that, you actually cause that woman to lose respect for you.
Mhm.
And so it's so important, and leading up to marriage, those days you spend with this woman is so important on both sides, because people talk about red flags and stuff, but if you're not paying attention to what she's showing you, I'm gonna tell you one thing: women are always paying attention, and they may not say anything, but it'll come a time where, and this is what I love about the idea of why God has created marriage for men. And you said it earlier, we need help. You see these areas in your life where you need help. And one of the biggest areas is accountability. So that woman will say, but you said, and this is what you did, or you're not doing X, Y, and Z. And as men, we get in our feelings because of who are you? What you mean, who are you? It's a woman you chose. So that being said, I do want to tap into this for a little while because
Mhm.
I think this will help people too. Who did you marry? If you don't mind going into that. And I want you to just, I think you know where I'm getting at. Who did you
Yeah.
marry?
So my wife's name is Heidi, right? By that name, I'm Haitian. She is Dutch, German, blonde, green eyes, right? So very different from me, very different from me. And, growing up, there had been, I had dated a couple white women, whatever, but it's crazy because when I came out to Chicago, I said, yo, I'm only black, Hispanic, all that, right? But that's not how God sees things. But yeah, I'll let you ask the next question. But yeah,
Well, no, no, no. And
yeah.
and I mean for me, I think the interracial conversation is such a controversial one. It's one that we don't want to talk about. It's one that we frown upon at times. And if you share the same views as Dr. Umar Johnson, you don't subscribe to it. Let me ask you this. Are there any challenges that you face with this dynamic, with the interracial dynamic?
So I'd say two. One of them is over with. The other one's always going to be a thing. One was always just me mentally, right? Just a thing of saying, man, like man, I'd love to have, like they say, black love, right? Black love, black love. That's worldly, first of all. Um, there's just God's love and the love that He said to have for one another. But that was the first part. But then that's something I got over that soon. The one that you will get and will always be there is outside, right? You walk in with a white woman, you'll get looks maybe from a black woman, stank looks.
Yeah.
Like, oh, like, like just getting mad, like, whatever. Like, oh, right. So that's always going to be there. And then two is sometimes older black folk too. They'll look at it and be like, man, that's a, well put together young black man. Why couldn't he have found this or found that? But, God had for me what God had for me. It reminds me of was it Peter when he had the vision about, and basically it was them showing him showing basically it was about the Gentiles, right? And God said, "Don't call unclean what I have made clean." So it's almost like we're saying like, "Oh no, this isn't good, or this isn't clean, or this should." It's like what's unclean, what's show me biblically. Yeah,
Well, you remember this is also what Moses went through. He's a Jewish man. His wife was Ethiopian, and so there were issues. I feel like this will always be a concern in society, right? In today's culture, which leads me to the next thing. Do you think has culture impacted your decision on who you married, or could it have?
100% could have. 100% could have. And I'd say this, if it were not for the prayer group, 100% would not have. Because the prayer group meets every Monday. And at the time, so this is going back where I made the decision to be with my now wife. I was obviously, before we were together, I was talking to different other women, right? Call it what it is. And there was one I dated for like a week, but then I broke it up. I talked about prayer group. Christian, but we talking zodiac signs and crystals and all that. Had to stop that. And then another one where it was like, but they were black women, right? And that appealing look of okay, black love, and they were doing well in their career and stuff. And it's like, oh, this is what the culture is saying we should be as a black power couple. However, understanding how both of them are, it would have drifted me off of my because we talk about this all the time. should someone who's saved marry someone who's not saved? Like, that's just a question. Because at the end of the day, which way is it going to go? Right? Because we know forever, it ain't always, and then when you have children, right? How do you teach the children? Going to church. Because I know in my house, like Joshua says, for me in my house, we will serve the Lord. So I don't care what you go do, but on Sunday, you getting up and we going to church. Well, you got someone on this way, you know, are they gonna make the kids go to? So all this different stuff. So when I say culture, yes, it could have. However, that's where the power of community, don't forsake the assembling of the saints, comes into play, because when you're constantly being around that and understanding, like, now this is the lens we need to look to things, that culture stuff's gonna be there, man. And if you're not feeding yourself, one on your own and your relationship with God, but being around other people who are either living to that standard or trying to live to that standard, I think I could have easily went that other way. Easily. It's a thin line too, bro. It's not like it's like just because you walk on this walk, oh, everything's so much easier. It's like, nah, bro. Like, shoot, it'd be tough.
It's more stakes too,
hmm
because you know you have a expected end. There's so many kingdoms that have been torn down because of the choices that men made with women. So what you're essentially talking about is when we say this all the time, at least in 2024, we would kingdom over culture. You know what I mean? Kingdom over culture, because at the end of the day, I want what God has for me, and I'm gonna be obedient and do what He's asked me to do. So I want to go here for a second and just pivot just for a bit. You talked about children and having one with another one on the way. Congratulations, by the way, my niece and my nephew. So, what have been some challenges, because essentially you came into the marriage with children already being a factor? What have been some challenges to that being kind of at the start of your relationship where you're raising children?
I'd say, and I'll say these, and I don't know if they're going to be too much different than other marriages at the start, but right. And we don't know the other route, so we don't know if this wouldn't have been as much of a challenge, or hey, no, it would have been the same. But I'd say is, when you get married, you want to establish that time for y'all first, because it's husband and wife first, then the kids. So we kind of had to figure out how to make husband and wife first, and then the kids on the fly while still having the kid. I'd say that was a challenge, and I think it's something that still is making sure that we're prioritizing ourselves and us in our marriage. Still, the thing that helped us was we did jump into some counseling, right? We did do Bible studies on it. I have a men's prayer group. She had joined a group that, they meet for like a certain amount of weeks and then take a break and then start up again. So again, community, right? And then seeking God on how we should be. And this made it easier. Doesn't mean it's not a challenge, but definitely made it easier because we know we have instructions on how it should be.
This I do want to navigate with you for a second in terms of children. How have you guys had discussions on navigating raising your children? And let me kind of give some context to the question. You're a Black male. There are different struggles and different things that you will go through that she or any of her brothers or uncles or cousins may have to deal with. That's one part. But then there's the part of just agreeing on how we raise, because you come from Haitian background, you know, you may have been raised differently.
Yeah.
So how have you guys had the conversation surrounding raising children, be it from an interracial standpoint or just in general from just backgrounds?
Yeah. So this is something that conversations, communication, but then also it's going to be a constant, right? Because you haven't seen every situation, different ages, different ways to try to implement things. But yeah, so one is we definitely had those conversations. So the easier part is there's one thing that we always agree on, God's way, right? So
Mm,
that's the one. So that makes a lot of the rest easier. Now, some of the struggle is, little things, man. It's not even something big that you can point at, but like, this is how we should do this for him or whatever for him. However, I think the thing that's understood is, I'm the leader of the pack. So ultimately, it's up to a lot of it's up to me, but also as a leader of the pack, I have to understand when it's time to step back and say, you know what, this I agree with you, or hey, you know what I mean? You feel strongly about this, here we go. But as a leader, ultimately, it comes down to you. So if you do make that decision, so it's a balance. It's like, man, I'm the leader, so I have to make the call. But sometimes the call is to not make the call and let somebody else make the call. I mean, so it's having that discernment. That's what we talk about constantly going to God. Like Moses, bro, something would happen. He go chill, talk to God and say, yo, what do I do? Right? So he's constantly going back, constantly going back. So it's the same thing. When you have a relationship with God and you're constantly praying, you don't always have to make because you're not always gonna have that luxury, right? So that's where it's like, the Holy Spirit's gonna guide you in those situations. But sometimes, man, you're like, I gotta go. I need this time with God. I might need to spend 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, whatever. Um, but can you be trusted to do that? I think is the ultimate thing. And can your wife trust you to do that? Now they're human at the end of the day, right? And it's crazy because I can't remember if we talked about it on the prayer group. The things that God called us to do as husbands and women to do as wives isn't going to always naturally come easy. Die to ourselves daily, right? Like Christ died for the church. Bro, our pride, our ego, sometimes, bro, I ain't dying to nothing right now. Nah, yo, this is how I feel. This is how we go do it. But again, die to yourself, right? And then for her, hey, submit. Submit in full submission can be hard sometimes,
yes,
right?
yes.
Because at the end of the day, they're a person, they're human, but then they have their own wants, needs, and desires, and they might feel a certain way about something. So my head saying, like, yo, when you feel strongly about something, having to just submit and kick back, like that'd be tough. So it's the practice of it, man. I think it's probably always gonna be some type of, but it's continuing to talk about it. Um, yeah.
So you said something that I wanted to just go back to real quick. You said it's a constant going back to God for instructions and for guidance. So I like to say that prayer is a revolving door.
Mhm.
You're continually coming back to it because, and this is a question I would ask, as a newlywed, is there ever any fear of making the wrong decision for your family?
1,000% right now. I'm switching careers, not careers, but I'm switching jobs. And bro, this past week, I was sitting there, a couple things changed up, you know what I mean? And it's always, especially one thing when you have a quick leave, but basically, anyways, like, health insurance is all through me for work, right? We're a young family and we're going to keep growing. So we're going to have to move at some point. So you talk about the financial pieces of it. You talk about just healthcare and those pieces of it. So many more pieces. And then also making sure, hey, whatever I go into isn't fully taking me too much away because I work in the corporate field and you know how that can go. You could spend all your time there and now you don't really got time for the fam. So now I'm not putting too much on my wife and make sure I'm present for my kids and being there. So all these different things. And then also that job isn't taking over my time with God also. Well, first and foremost, right, most important thing, because even aside from my family, I gotta have time with God. So it's all these things trying to balance. And it's like, sometimes, when I was a single man, choices I could make, and we talk about this. There's certain we're all gonna mess up. There's certain things you like, okay, you have that grace to mess up on, but bro,
Right.
sometimes when you have a family, the stakes are higher.
Yeah.
You can't really mess up on certain things, right? Certain things won't just set you back. Well, I'm a single guy, I mess up, I take the wrong job, whatever, da da da. Cool, I live minimal, whatever. I was like, nah, bro, we got doctor's appointments, we got these appointments, we got my wife's care, postpartum, all that stuff when she gives like all these things that it's like, oh, okay, bro, you got to be, you know, you gotta. It's me, which is good depending on God. It causes me to depend on God even more. So I know I started going into, but I hope I answered your question there.
No, for sure, for sure. I think like I had a situation where my wife and I didn't agree. Well, she didn't agree with my stance with my youngest daughter. And I like these conversations because even though the premise is the same, sometimes the context is different. What I mean by that is my youngest is not my biological child. And so navigating that, there was something that I had said or a stance I took that my wife didn't agree on. It got a little hectic, you know. And again, like you say, I think also there's boundaries that have to be set when you are talking about how you raise children. And so, long story short, I'm not putting her out there. She came back and apologized to me about how she responded. I've done that before. And so I think, and I'll ask you this too, I think I've come to realize, like say, die to yourself, that there's a lot more humbling as the leader that you actually have to do for your marriage to be successful. So, that being said, have there been any times where you've had to humble yourself and where it's been a challenge for you? And just real quick, just because again, I'm called to be the leader, I'm called to lead us where we need to go. But like you said, there's times where I'm called to lead, but my leading sometimes is not that it's me who's making the final decision. Have there been times where you've had to humble yourself as a husband in regards to the decision or the direction of your family?
Yes, and there's times I could bring up right where it's like, hey, I was wrong. So it's always a little easier to humble yourself when it's like, dang, I was wrong, right? So now you ask for forgiveness. Toughest times to humble yourselves is where you may be right about something, but for example, maybe the way I went about something and being right. Maybe it's the way I approached it. Maybe it was my posture on it, right? And like, yeah, bro, you're right on this, but like how you do something and how you go about it matters, right? So in those situations, it's like, man, why do I gotta go back and apologize for something I'm right about? Like that don't make no sense. But
That was my situation.
but also understanding, bro, when you are a leader, the expectations on you are different. The expectations on a LeBron, a Kobe, a Jordan are different than the expectations on a Tyrese Halliburton. Halliburton could go out there have 14 points, and that's a great game.
Right,
Kobe, LeBron, Joe, you better not score 20 minimum. Minimum. And then now we can start talking about how your night was. So,
right.
but basically the point is like hey, when you're called to be a leader, as a man, as a leader of household, you are it's not you have to show you and also it's a demonstration to my son, right? Obviously he doesn't fully understand those things now, but it's like how are we to conduct because my last name is my family, right? Now that this is our name, this is who we are. So as a leader, I'm supposed to set the tone and the example of this is how we communicate with each other. This is
Mm,
how we operate when you're whether right, wrong, or whatever it may be. Because there's something about being loudly. Because if you loud when you right, you'll be loud when you wrong.
yep,
You know that saying, loud you loud and wrong.
yep.
So when you do all things in humility, irregardless, like I think you'll be fine. But yeah, it's those times where you think you're right or you might be right, but you just don't conduct yourself the right way in it. So it's learning. And then how you communicate with everybody is different. How you communicate with your wife's going to be different. How you communicate with your kids and understanding like, hey, I need to be effective. And sometimes you do got to be stern on it. However, it's finding that path, man. And it ain't easy all the time. But sometimes I'll be thinking I did it right, but I'm like, I guess not.
Well, let me share this with you because sometimes you could do it right and no one in the household sees it that way.
Right.
Okay. And you still had to stand on that decision that you made. Okay. It's a little encouragement because, man, it the crown is heavy. And I don't say that from a dictator standpoint. I say it because we are the leaders of our households. Like I said, as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. But in serving the Lord, it is on you to lead and guide your family, as we've discussed. And again, sometimes there are unpopular decisions you have to make, and you cannot be swayed by emotions and doing it. So I got probably one more big question, and then we've got a shotgun series of
Mm.
questions, okay, that you answer in 2 minutes or less. Two questions. What did your father teach you about marriage?
My father taught me, now my father wasn't married, never married, a lot of kids, different women. However, you can always learn regardless of someone's situation. I understood the what I learned from my father is the importance of not being out in those streets, right? And the dependence that or the relationship that your kids will seek with you, man. Times where, me and him wouldn't get along, he's not understanding different stuff. I understand now because it's like, bro, you got like 10 kids, child support, you got to work, bro. You know what I'm saying? Like, and all stuff. He was always working at different things, but like as a kid, kids aren't always going to understand those things. So, and at the end of the day, then when you try to discipline them, bro, you don't got no relationship. You're not really a part of their lives. So now if you try to discipline, it's like, bro, who are you? Like, like, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
So it taught me the importance of, to me, that relationship with my kids was always going to be important because I didn't necessarily have that with my father. The understanding too that, hey, the most important piece of it was my mother and my father didn't get along. So I was
right,
always going to suffer. So
right.
it made me realize, yo, me and my wife, for us to have a strong family unit, we have to be strong together. So that's what it taught me.
I
That's like,
like that. I like that. So I'm going to ask this question. It's not a follow-up question necessarily based on what you said, but I think as men, we need to see examples. And, that's the reason why in the hood, what we see is, ooh, I see LeBron. I see Jordan. I see Ja Morant.
mhm.
I see these figures. That's what I want to do. That's what I want to be. Right. So as a newlywed, someone coming into marriage, did you ever see a successful marriage?
Yes. However, it was once I got a little older. First time I got invited to church was actually I was in LA and I was doing door-to-door knocking doors, doing solar. And there was this older gentleman who, we started talking, was cool. I remember his name to this day, Gary. He was like, yo, man, come on down to, me and my boy. He was like, come on down to our church, right? And it was him and his wife and whatever. They welcomed us. They said, sit with us here. Bro, I was sobbing like a baby, but would start to be around them, would go to church with them. They say, yo, come by, you can come in our pool whenever. And then again in LA, there was another family who was like, all right, we were like their adopted kids because their kids had moved out. We come over, eat dinner with them. We came to their different like Thanksgiving parties, different stuff, and they were a successful marriage. So like sitting, I was like, bro, sitting at the table and eating, hearing their stories about their lives, marriage, whatever. Especially that second, the one that invited me to church, very quick, but they still had young kids and they were, which is still fine. But the other one's perspective, like, yo, man, they're on that back end and they're just talking about all these different things, showing us pictures. I'm like, man, it's dope. Like, you know what I mean? Like to kick back when you 60s, 70s and really just like, and you could feel it and see it. And I'm sure things weren't always perfect, right? But like here they are at that age and they're together. They made it work and they still love each other. So, and then I started to see other things. And you met you, right? As part of the prayer group and a couple others as I started to get older. But yeah.
Got you. Got you. let me ask you this. What do you think are signs, or what would you call a successful marriage?
It's gonna be there's a lot of ways you could put it, but I'd say this is one thing I got for them. Forgiving, forgiving, right? Because you gotta forgive each other a lot. And now forgiving, people take that for granted. Like forgiving isn't just saying, okay, we move past it, whatever. No, 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 no. True forgiveness, right? True forgiveness. Like leave it at the altar of forgiveness. You know what I'm saying? like, so that was one of the most important things is I heard and got told is you're gonna have to forgive each other. It could be big, could be small. And then also too, man, just acceptance because that person's gonna change, gonna grow. I'm different than I was when we first met. She's different. And this is only a short amount of years. In 5 years,
Right,
I'm gonna be different too.
right,
So it's just accepting the development and that growth of that person because we're always growing, we're always developing. I'm 30 years old now. I used to think when I was that if you asked me 5 years ago, I would have been, I would have had it all figured out by 30. Nah,
right,
nah.
right.
Yeah, I got a couple of gray hairs on here, but I'm still trying to figure stuff out, right? So it's like, and a grace. I think the forgiveness, grace, and just accepting that person, their flaws, and trying to help them grow too,
Right.
right? Because God's called them to be somebody or do something
Yes.
or do some
Yes.
things. And it's like, you got to help that person grow into that.
I love that. All right. So we are at the point of the podcast where I'm going to say two things. First of all, if you've
Mhm.
made it this far with us, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. Follow us on all social media outlets. We're everywhere, soon to be on Spotify and Apple Podcasts.
Yes,
So
sir.
we have now entered the shotgun series of questions. I said 2 minutes earlier, 60 seconds or less. Ready?
Yes, sir.
All right. What is your greatest fear of marriage?
Ooh. Letting my wife and my kids down.
Got you. All right. Biggest challenge as a newlywed.
This gonna be something crazy. I'm gonna put myself on the chopping block. Not being so judgmental and just accepting that things ain't gonna be done the way I want them done all the time.
Mm, I want to put a pin on that one. Woo. Okay. Okay. Why do you think men are afraid of marriage?
Men are afraid of failure. They're afraid to mess up.
Wow. You shotgunning it. All right. Last one. Are there things that you can do to prevent divorce?
Submit yourself to God. It sounds easy. It's not easy, bro. That's something I'm still, but submitting yourself to God and then also surrounding yourself with other men who want to be successful in marriage. You want to be a good hooper? Play with good hoopers. You know what I'm saying? You want to be smarter on a subject, surround yourself with those experts, but surround yourself, immerse yourself. Don't be watching church from home every Sunday. And if you have to, you have to because you haven't found church, whatever situation. But man, just be around the right people too, that you can be open and honest with also.
I love that. Well, I got to put in a plug, and I want to say this as we prepare to close out. One of your brothers asked a specific question, so that's a perfect transition, being around men who want to be successful in marriage. So one of your brothers texted me one day and said, "What do I have to do to prepare to be a husband?" Out of that question came this. Okay. And by the way, this book is available via ebook right now. In about 2 to 3 weeks, within the next 30 days, I'll say the paperback will be available. That question sparked this book, which is going to help so many different people. Okay. A workbook is also being made right now because what I believe is, and I'll say this much before we close, I believe the church has not prepared men for marriage. I believe what we've done in the church is that we tell people what to do, what not to do, but we don't prepare people or show them how. You prepare people by showing them how. We know that every situation is not cookie cutter, so that's not what we're saying. There are nuances to every relationship, but there are still your basic core things of preparation. That being said, our last thing to touch on, that article I sent you where it talked about evangelistic men who were taught the purity culture. And in that purity culture, it did not prepare them for marriage. So, that was my realm. And I took that a certain kind of way because I felt like it was a shot against the church, but I also agreed with it. So, briefly, what were your thoughts about that article?
So this is something that we've talked about a lot too. And to your point, it does take a shot at, but not depends how you want to look at it, right? Not in a terrible way, but it's pointing out something that needs to be talked about. Unless something's talked about, man, it won't be changed, right?
Exactly.
So I'm always someone for let's talk about it. But I'm with you. What happens when you're somebody like, and let's keep it a buck too. If you grew up in the church, then you heard about purity, right? And those things. What happens when you're somebody like me who I'm not really in the church too. And when I was little, my mother would bring me to a Catholic church here and there, but not real. I didn't grow up in the church. I'm 20, 21. I done already did what I've done, and now I'm hearing about purity. Oh, it's a wrap for me. And then when you get to a certain level of maturity, you understand like, hey, it's not a wrap for you. But when you're coming into the church, you don't have that maturity. All you're hearing about is purity. So it's like, all right, this ain't for me then, right? Which can turn some people off. But I think it's important, man. I think it's something that should be talked about. And then also talking about, okay, what happens when you do, right? What do you do? We got to talk about repentance because purity, what does purity mean? None of us are pure, right? So what does that actually mean? What does it mean to live a life of, sanctification, right? Why, right? Well, the whys of it. Okay, when you do, what should you do, right? What do you do next, right? Because we already know, like Adam and Eve in the garden, you go hide, right? If you did grow up in the church,
Yeah.
you know about that. So it's like we put people in these situations, especially younger people, right? To where now they're hiding or they're not coming to church or they're like, that's not for me because I can't or I have this struggle. Because some people, man, it's tough for some people because that's in their bloodline, bro. Like they fighting something they don't know what they're fighting. That's why we, clean, shout out to your brothers that clean. Is like this is in your blood. You don't know that, bro. This is generation after generation that's been hitting you. And there's tools that God has for us to fight these things, but we're not talking about those tools because we just talking purity. So I don't load. That's a loaded, man. That's a segment in and of itself.
It's in and of itself, bro.
In and of itself. But I think it's dope. I think it's something that needs to be talked about. And I think it's just not about the preventative. But okay, once you do, now, how do we approach this, right? Like, what,
Right.
so.
I love that. Quickly, briefly. So overall, it suggested the article, and it was a secular article. It suggested that you're doing all this purity,
Mhm.
but how does it help you when you become married? That was my goal, was to be pure. And so I abstained from sex until I met my first wife, foretelling, right? So that was a challenge in and of itself because she was experienced, I was not. I was not prepared for how I should behave in that relationship sexually because it's off limits until you get married. But what happens when you are married? See, that's the other flip side of things. And I'll say this much. The article made it seem like there shouldn't be any struggle. And what I say is two things. I feel like we have to get away from thinking that we shouldn't struggle with things. The second part to that is you should struggle to figure out your wife's body. What I mean by struggle is simply the challenge or the fun of exploration,
Yeah.
right? Because that is your wife now. Explore. The Bible says the marriage bed is undefiled. That doesn't mean you should just do anything. There's boundaries around that, but
Yeah.
explore. That's your wife. And that is why sex was created. But I think from a secular standpoint, it's like, oh no, go do whatever. But the problem is with that is now you'll go and you'll learn things you shouldn't do. And now that has to be deconstructed in your marriage, right? And so as a newlywed, you're trying to figure out, okay, God, is it, I can do whatever, or and then I think the other part to that I will say is this much. You're trying to bring unholy to a holy institution. Okay. And now that this mindset of, okay, I've been so used to doing things this certain way. So now porn is introduced, you know, threesomes and open relationships, and how do you navigate that? And because it's all about my pleasure. So now it becomes to be selfish. So now we've taken and we've what was supposed to be holy and pure now has become tainted because of what I brought to the relationship, which is a mindset that was perverted. Perverted just simply meaning the wrong version. All right. Well, we got to get out of here. We want to thank you guys. Again, we want to ask that you subscribe to the YouTube channel. Okay. We want to ask that you stay locked in to what we've got going on, because you're going to have men like this young man who will bring an aspect to marriage, and he'll be back on the podcast again, but bringing real vulnerable aspects to marriage. And this is what we do every Monday. So this is just a version of us sharing this with you from our prayer group. God bless you guys. We look forward to you joining and being in this journey with us. We'll see you on the next episode.
Appreciate you, Corey.